emergency. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Luddle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Pavement Management Group has been consulting with us since 2001, and they look at every segment of our road every 3 years. So we do a third of the streets every year, and then they give us a report, and that's how we build our what we call our pavement condition index rating, and how we establish what streets are resurfaced and when. So this is to do 2019 and 2020. They have previously worked to deal with AMATs, where they are going to actually look at 141 of our center line miles of our 829. So we're going to get that data also through AMATs. So that's what this is for.
Can you explain center line miles to me? I'm not sure what that terminology means.
Let's say you were, let's say High Street. Okay. So from Market to Exchange, that would be a center line mile. Okay, so if it's a mile long, the center of the streets, you know, it's not all 4 lanes, it's just the center of the street.
Okay. I learned something new today. Thank you, Mr. Luddle. Are there any questions from the members of the committee? Councilman Hoke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this this company that's doing the assessing and looking at this, I know that last year I asked for an assessment of all the concrete streets in Ward 6, and I never saw anything, you know, come back to me about it. And
they do assess our concrete streets.
Okay.
Not only asphalt, but I can get you that.
I'd like to get a report on all the concrete streets in Ward 6.
Sure.
You know, and I know what level they're at, so I'm pretty sure I know what the I would imagine what I would rate them at. So you know, hopefully somebody that does it for a living would you know, be able to come up with something close to what I think. Also, last year, I know when I was going back and forth with some emails, and I know an email to Mr. Hall on June 15th of last year, we talked about Shelburne and Highgrove streets, which are concrete streets, and he submitted requests in the capital improvement for those 2 streets and to be, you know, included in the capital improvement, which they weren't. And you know, do we have any plans for concrete streets? I mean, I get emails weekly.
Yes.
About these.
We're looking at a process right now, and they're doing a simulation down in Green, where a company's coming in and they're milling off 1.5 inches of the street, and then they're going to resurface over it. And they put a what they call like a tack course in between, a mat course, to keep that reflective cracking from coming through, because the only other way to do it is to totally remove all the concrete and rebuild the road. Yeah. Okay, so we are looking at that. One of our local companies here, an Akron engineering firm, I just talked to them last week about a demonstration, and they're going to reach out to Jim and myself to go down and look at that as an option. Some of the streets, when they get so bad, that's not an option. Roaming Road, that was not an option. It needs to all be removed and rebuilt. So we are looking at that for some of these streets.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I would imagine there's some of the streets that are in the ward that are concrete are not going to be eligible for something like that because of the condition that they're in and how right. How bad they are. Do you know exactly how long it's going to be until this? We know anything about this process, and you know, if it can be used and if it will be used?
I think what we're going to do in the legislation we'll have in, we'll take this information from them in the rating of the street, and we'll compare it if it's even eligible for something like that. And if it is not eligible for that, totally needs rebuilt, and then we have to go through the assessment process where, you know, we would send letters, put it in the capital budget, do a whole workup for each street, yes.
Okay.
And that may take a few years to get it where you're going to rebuild the street. It won't happen this year.
Oh, I know it won't happen this year. Yeah,
yes.
that's for damn sure.
Yes.
Yeah, but you know, there is something that does need to be happening with these streets, and these concrete streets are horrible. I can't believe that we're even thinking about putting a concrete street on Rumwick Road. Other than you know, you need to speed it along and you have to use concrete in order to get it in. You know, concrete streets, I have not seen really a whole lot of them that are very nice in the city of Akron. And you know, we put them in, but you know, as far as you know, they're good for a certain amount of years, and then after that, you know, they just get neglected, and they're not being taken care of, and they're not being replaced, and we need to do something about that. And
We definitely need a long-term maintenance process, and that's what we've planned with Roaming Road. And moving forward, we're going to do that. With the issue 4 funds that were passed, and we have a funding source, because no matter what you put in, nothing's maintenance free. And it could be a road, it could be a sidewalk, and if you don't have any maintenance at all, you're going to have the problem we have. So moving forward, everything we do, we're going to look as far as continuing maintenance of these streets or the infrastructure.
okay, all right. Well, and I know it's been a long, hard road, and there's been years of
No pun
neglect.
intended.
No, yeah. But the years of neglect and getting up to here, and I know that there's things that are being done and being looked at that are different, you know, but, you know, hopefully this you know, will move forward at a better pace, you know, not above the speed limit, but,
Yes.
you know, something that'll get us there. Thank you very much.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Madam Chair.
Are there any other members of the committee that have questions? Any other members from council members in chambers?
Consent would
Mr.
be
Little,
fine.
may I ask one thing?
Sure.
Is this close to the costs that we have paid in the past, or has that increased?
Yes.
So that, okay. And what is your pleasure?
Consent is fine.
Okay. May I have a motion for consent? Okay, I have a motion for consent. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the consent agenda. Number 3, under public service, is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee, without publicly advertising for bids, to enter into a contract or contracts with Coleman Corporation for the purchase of a core cut walk behind pavement saw and declaring an emergency. I think this is what every father should have in their garage. Okay, so, Mr. Little.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This saw is the saw we use every day, and we're going to purchase the same one. We have the blades and the other material that goes with this saw, so we'd like to purchase a brand new saw. This saw is the one we use to do all the water and sewer repair, the temporary. They go back in and they cut the pavement so you have a clean edge, whether it's concrete or asphalt, and then our highway maintenance department does all the repairs of these.
Okay, and so this is for a brand new saw.
Brand new saw.
Mr. Hall, how many blades do we go through? Wasn't it January that we had a record number of breaks, water main breaks this year?
Last year.
Last year.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are getting, I think, 4 blades with this saw, 3 or 4 blades. Typically you have 1 blade for asphalt, 1 for concrete, another 1 for brick, just based on the hardness of the materials.
Okay, so, and how long will those blades last you? Would you, on a typical, not like we had a year ago?
I would say maybe a season or 2.
Okay.
This past saw was 4 years worth of work before it expired, and that was, I think, something around 7,000 pavement removal sections.
Good to know. Thank
Yes.
you. Well, it sounds like it's a need, but I'm going to turn it over to the committee. Are there any questions or concerns or comments from the committee? Seeing none, are there any questions from council members in the chambers? Seeing none, what is your pleasure?
Can I ask for suspension of the rules?
I think that would be a good idea. Okay, I'll make a motion for suspension of rules. Is there, and I have a second. So there's a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will go down with suspension of the rules. Number 4, under Public Service, ordinance determining to proceed with the improvement of North Main Street between the termini of State Route 59 and Market Street and South Main Street between the termini of Market Street and Mill Street by paving, grading, constructing, and reconstructing curbs, concrete sidewalks, driveway approaches, and utility vaults, installing street lighting, planting trees, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Little.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is what we would call Tiger 2. It would be going north from the roundabout all the way to Perkins. We're very excited about this project. Again, we received an $8 million federal grant, and with Christine Junkia and her team, they did secure another $2 million from OPWC, so that's a little over $10 million out of this $15 million project that we received to do this. We did advertise it on Saturday. We are going to receive the bids back on July 17th. We'll review the bids. We will award and we will start construction probably later this year.
Well, first, it's commendable that we got Tiger 1, but then to get Tiger 2 is unbelievable for the city of Akron. And then on top of it, Christine, thank you so much for the work you did to get the additional $2 million that is going to just add to what we're already doing and also decrease what we're going to have to owe to do what we're doing here. Thank you very much. Oftentimes, as we well know, it's our engineers behind the scenes that don't get the applause that they truly deserve for. Are you? I don't know. But yeah, all of the committee wants to thank you for this. This is tremendous. That what we see as our portion has dwindled down considerably. Are there any questions from the members of the committee? Any comments or questions from members of council in the chambers? Seeing none, what is your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
Okay, do I have a motion for consent? I have a motion for consent. Do I have a second? Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will go on the consent agenda. Now, as requested, I skipped over the what we had on public service. We have a few items that were on public service. I would like right now to look at the first item on public service. And I will tell you that Mr. Lettle and whoever else, we're going to have a presentation now. I don't know what your time allots you for, but you would not have to have any reason to have to stay here if you have other things that you need to do. So that's why I wanted to make sure we got over with the new legislation. And we're going to take time on 2, 3, and 4, but would like to go back to number 1 on the old legislation. And this is a resolution calling upon the Congress of the United States to introduce and pass legislation to create a national infrastructure bank in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton and Franklin Roosevelt and declare an emergency. And I would like to thank Councilwoman Tara Samples for actually building a relationship with Stuart Rosenwald. Okay, thank you for allowing that. I know him as Stuart now, and his wife Angela Vullo for taking the time to come here to Akron and for speaking. And you know what, you can come right up to the chairs here. I think it'll be more comfortable for you. Okay. And Stuart, I'll allow you to introduce your party that's going to speak. They have asked for about 10 or 15 minutes to explain this resolution to us, and I have to tell you, it's a little bit complicated for me, and that doesn't say a whole lot because some of you have much more knowledge of this than I do, but I think it's going to be very appealing, and they've brought information with them so that as we take in this today, we will not vote on it today. We're just going to be listeners. And if we happen to have questions, we'll be able to directly ask our questions now for a little bit of time, or even as the week goes on. I would, however, like all of you to know that I would like to vote on this next week. I did not feel comfortable prior to wanting to vote on this because I myself did not have enough information. But, and there still may be more questions that we may have. But having said that, I'm going to turn it over now to Stuart and ask you to introduce, except you don't have to introduce the gentleman at the end there because we know him as Councilman Swirsky. So we know him. Okay. I'm teasing you, but you were busy reading. Okay. So the floor is open. If you turn that, a green light should come on there if you turn that. And sometimes they don't, but just trust me, if you pull it towards you, you're on.
Is it on? Is it on?
It sounds good over here.
Sounds good to me.
You can sing, and we'll let you know. But.
All right. I can whistle. Okay. My name is Stuart Rosenblatt, and I'm part of a national coalition for a national infrastructure bank. I'm from the D.C. area, although I grew up in Cleveland and graduated high school on the east side of Cleveland, and so I'm got a little bit of Buckeye whatever in me, blood. My wife, Angela Vullo, will speak first, and she's from the D.C. metro area, also active. We're both active on this. And then Ralph Strezza is a Akron citizen and is also going to speak for a couple of minutes, attorney and kind of political expert. So, all right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Angela, and she'll give you a couple of quick minutes on background.
Oh, I'm not sure this is on.
There you go.
Okay. My name is Angela Vullo. I serve on the steering committee of Our Revolution in Northern Virginia, which serves 4 congressional districts. And I'm here to talk about the urgency for a national infrastructure bank. This would direct federal funds into the states and cities to build infrastructure, which we have not done in a significant way since 1933. It really ended overall in the 1960s with the Kennedy space program. But this is absolutely urgent as our infrastructure goes back 150 years, some of it, in terms of our tracks and water systems, so that's back to the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln did use a national infrastructure bank. It was actually used 4 times in U.S. history, beginning with Alexander Hamilton, and that's how the country was built. And because we have not invested into infrastructure in 50 years, the country has been moving backwards. And it has not only affected our rail, our water, our power systems, but the impact has actually bled into the fabric of our society to the point that we have 40 million people in extreme poverty, the wages are stagnant, the income inequality gap is at an all-time high. We have opioid and drug overdoses off the charts, which these are deaths of despair. So anybody that wants to make the argument that we're in a time of affluence, you know, unemployment is at an all-time low, everybody's doing great, et cetera, this couldn't be further from the truth. So what we are calling upon is the Congress to put in a bill for a national infrastructure bank that would be all-inclusive. It would defend the general welfare of everybody in the country, raise the standard of living, level the playing field, build the middle class, build unions, and get the United States back on the right track. Thank you.
Okay, next I'm going to introduce Ralph Strezza from Akron, who will make a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenblatt. I'm a member or a resident of Ward 8. Councilwoman Keith is my councilwoman. I've left phone messages on all members of this committee, so I'm really here to demonstrate that the messages you received were not from a robot. I like this concept. I am not an expert on the bank and how it functions, but I am very much in favor of the things that Franklin Roosevelt did and did for our country. The resolution that's been introduced by Councilwoman Samples is, I think, a statement to Congress that a city in Northeast Ohio that's greatly affected by diminishing infrastructure is a leadership kind of act. And so I am encouraging both the committee and the council to seriously consider this resolution. It again demonstrates that the city of Akron is taking on a leadership role. My understanding of the bank is that once it's established, it's nonpartisan. And it doesn't mean that if you're right or left, it's a way for the country to fund significant infrastructure development. And I'm also a founding member of our revolution. That kind of gives you an idea of my own political attitude, but I think that this kind of legislation makes great sense. If you pass the resolution, it's not doing anything in terms of spending money or raising money. It's just simply asking Congress to do something. And as I understand it also, there are no pending bills in Congress to do something, and the current administration has not introduced or shown its hand as to what it intends to do. So, as one of your residents and a proud resident to be a member of Akron's community, I hope that you'll consider Ms. Samples' resolution and endorse it and have present it to the council for full vote. Thank you.
Great. Okay. What I'll do is take a couple of minutes and actually go through what it is we're proposing in brief outline, and then take questions, because I think probably in discussion we'll get a little bit more at this. There's a gigantic infrastructure deficit in the country. I mean, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says $3.7 trillion. The civil engineers say $4.7 trillion. The building and construction trades say $4 trillion. It's at least $4 trillion. Part of it is funded by the Congress, but that assumes that the tax revenues and revenue coming into the Congress continues. And if you look at the jobs reports over the last 4 months, which are falling precipitously, who knows? And then you've got really, we believe, for at least $4 trillion, which is what the gap is, not simply $2 trillion. Why? A new study that came out of Cornell University, which you'll see in your handout, which was cited repeatedly by the House Transportation Committee, is that every dollar not spent this year on infrastructure balloons by 4 to 5 times within 8 to 10 years. So if we don't spend the $4 trillion this year, it's $16 trillion 8 to 10 years from now. So whatever you want to put the figure at, it's big. And we go to Congress every week, every other week. There are no bills that are big enough that will address this. And as Ralph said, the president is now walked away from any negotiations. There is zero coming out of the White House, and I mean zero. So what Congress initiates is what's going to be critical. Now, what I want to do is simply urge you to open up your packet, and you'll see in the packet that's got a draft resolution on the top. If you go back about 2/3 of the way, you'll see a very funny flow chart with a star in the middle. The Trenton City Council resolution, which is the model resolution that we're using around the country and here in Akron. If you go through your packet, you'll see a very funny thing which says, where is the money going to come from? And it's a flow chart. And that flow chart is how this national bank will work. And it will be a bank capitalized at $4 trillion plus or minus. So the picture looks like this. The flow chart that you're looking for looks like this with a star in the middle. And if it were in color, that star would say National Infrastructure Bank, but because I Xeroxed in black and white, you got just the star. Okay, because I know this is the big question. Where are you going to get $4 trillion from? Well, if Donald Trump would write a check, that would cover it, it would bounce, but hey. There are $22 trillion in outstanding U.S. Treasury debt. It's being increased at $1 trillion a year. $17 trillion is held privately. And that includes foreign countries, foreign governments. It includes corporations, insurance companies, banks, you name it. And those treasuries are getting approximately 2%, 2.5% per year rate of return. What Alexander Hamilton did in founding this kind of bank is he said, hey, all we got is debt. We have no economy. We are offering holders of the debt the right, and this is now the left-hand side of your flow chart, we are offering the holders of the treasuries the right to invest those treasuries in a bank, and in exchange, as you follow your flow chart, they will get the equivalent amount in stock in the bank, paying a guaranteed 4%. Congress will only have to cover the new interest. Everything else is funded. And it's the most secure kind of capital base you can have. It's a U.S. Treasury, which has never been defaulted on. So Congress would have to come up with $80 billion a year. That may seem like a lot, but relative to $4 trillion, frankly, it's very small. And Congress will have to choose how to do that. It can be any number of taxes which are being bandied about. Gas tax, regressive. Tax on Wall Street transactions, being put forward in every presidential campaign, and there is a bill in the Congress to do it already by Congressman DeFazio and a Senate companion. There are proposals by Elizabeth Warren, AOC, and others to tax excess wealth at X amount percent. That would cover the needed interest. There are any number of other proposals. Congress will have to come up with that. It will have to be a lockbox so that it's not tampered with by appropriations. Okay, that is your bank in shorthand, fully capitalized. It will then loan money at Treasury rates, 2%, to cities and states who hold the vast majority, own the vast majority of our infrastructure for massive infrastructure projects. That means we're going to both fix all the sewers and water systems and water mains and whatnot that, as Angela said, have been kicking. 240,000 water mains burst every year, 240,000. Our water mains in D.C. are made of wood because we have no idea how old they are or how to replace them. And it's not a game when they burst in your neighborhood. It's a real pain in the proverbial. We're going to fix it all. We're going to go into these states and cities like Detroit, Flint, Philadelphia, probably Akron and elsewhere, and we're going to replace all the water systems so kids don't have to worry about lead in the water. And we actually wrote specific provisions into our draft bill as per request from Congressman Clyburn that we go into every poor community and fix everything, white or black population, rural or urban. I'm going to fix it all. And we're going to partner with cities and states to do this. And because there will be a massive increase in output and a massive increase in productivity, we are going to generate an amazing flow of both tax receipts and overall GDP. So the other side of your flow chart is the bank partnering with cities and states, loaning money for infrastructure projects. Those infrastructure projects will supercharge the economy like it happened under FDR, Kennedy, in our more generations, but also historically going all the way back to the founders. And it will generate a tremendous boost in taxes coming in and so it will repay and actually replace at a certain point even the taxes that will be pledged to cover the interest. I have background material that we handed out to you. I printed out one thing that you'll get a kick out of. It's a study done by the Treasury Department. It says ENO on the top of it. And the Treasury took, Ms. Keith might want to hold that up. This is a great study. It was done by the U.S. Treasury Department. They did 350 projects, and they graded them by the rate of return, and they were blown away. The rate of return on these infrastructure projects was 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 7 to 1, 10 to 1 in terms of new gross domestic product created. So, because we are talking about 25 million new jobs, union wages, and training programs for everybody who's currently unemployed in the gig economy, underemployed, et cetera. So that's what it looks like. That's probably too much. That's enough. We could go into a lot more, but I just open it up and see where we go.
I'm just going to ask you to comment. This has been done in the past. I had the good fortune to be able to just impromptu sit down for a little bit, and I want more because it's so interesting. But this has been done in the past, and could you mention about the 4 banks that were started in?
Look, let me also tell you one thing which is completely appropriate and ironic, which is that Akron was a gigantic beneficiary of the Roosevelt Bank, which was called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He had the same bill we have, couldn't get it through Congress. FDR was a real character, and he just grabbed a Herbert Hoover institution and turned it into a national bank. The entire synthetic rubber industry was financed by Franklin Roosevelt's National Bank. They built between, I'm going to guess, 39 and 41, they built 51 new synthetic rubber factories de novo. And the reason why Akron is was the rubber capital of the world is because of Roosevelt's National Bank, which put countless thousands and thousands of people to work, grew the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Not to detract from LeBron James, I know he's also the other Akron's big claim to fame, although now he's a renegade out there in Hollywood. But the rubber industry really put Akron on the map, and it was Roosevelt's National Bank that did that. Each of the previous national banks ended up in the black. None of them were intended to. They were just intended to build everything that was needed and to finance it. But because the productivity grew at such a massive rate, it ended up that all these banks ended up in the black. If you look on the flip side of your flow chart of the bank, you'll see a chart of productivity, which is really the bars jump off the page. It's just a bunch of bars going, not the kind you can get a Michelob at, but a bar that, like a bar diagram. It is a bar diagram of rates of increase of productivity going back to the turn of the last century. And the thing that jumps off the page is the period 1930 to 1950, where real productivity was growing at almost 4% per year, and that's because of new technologies and new industries. It's this graph right here. Again, it's the flip side graph of how the bank works. And the reason for that is that the investments were in all new technologies, all new industries. For example, in the 2 years prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had built an entirely new machine tool industry and retooled factories all over the country, and the entire thing was paid for by Roosevelt's National Bank because they didn't have a vote from Congress. They didn't have a vote to go to war. FDR knew we were going to war, and he retooled all of our factories and built new ones, and that included right here in Akron. So that's just another side benefit. And once you do that, it's not merely that we're putting people to work, we're also bringing in new technologies. It's the difference between an economy based on canals, say 1790 to 1820, and an economy based on railroads. Your productivity increases in what are called nonlinear capabilities. They're totally different and they're more powerful. The output is more powerful. So that's how these banks always turn these crazy profits, and the people who did them never intended on doing that. It's a natural consequence. And great cities like Akron get built.
Thank you so much. I don't know how long we sat in my office, but there's so much more to this. What I would like to do is ask any member of the committee right now, and I would like all of us, when we ask a question, just to hold it to one question, so that, and then I can go back. But sometimes we have a wealth of blah, 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 and somebody else had the same question. So maybe if we could just ask the one burning question until all of us have had an opportunity, and then we'll go back. So members of the committee, do any of you have a question or concern or something that you would like clarified? Councilman Hoke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to find the article that I had read on this, and there were a lot of thoughts in the article that were against the infrastructure bank. You know, one of them being that this was a money grab for politicians and a way for them to get a hold of money for their districts and pet projects in their districts. You know, and that there was a number of states that have already tried this banking process and have failed at it because it just didn't work, and there wasn't enough I guess there wasn't enough, you know, I don't want to say interest because, but it just nobody paid attention to it, and the money went out, but the money didn't come back, and they had a lot of problems with that, and I know that in the article it also said that the same process of this banking idea is now being used in our low-interest bonds and loans, and that you know, there really isn't a necessity for this. And I was wondering, you know, how do you, you know, how can you tell me that you know, that the bank is better than the process that we have with low-interest loans and bonding, that we get this through, and how it would affect the city of Akron, Ohio.
Okay, please go right ahead.
Sure. Yeah, okay, that was a good one question. I thought it was good, I liked it. Okay, well, first of all, on the politicians getting their hands into this, because every time, you know, if you were in Congress and you had a cart going by when they were in session with $4 trillion in it, they would probably suspend the rules and everybody would go grab as much as they could. If you turn to the actual draft bill which we handed out, which says a bill to create, and you go to the Board of Directors, which is Section 7 Board of Directors, and it actually specifies that there ain't going to be any politicians involved in this. The bank will be like the Federal Reserve, but for infrastructure only. It will answer to Congress. It will be audited by Congress. It will give reports to Congress, but there will be no congressional interference. It will be a bank. The Board of Directors are going to only be people who have had 15 years experience hands-on building infrastructure. So there'll be engineers, there'll be company executives, you know, who own companies that build these kinds of things. There'll be banks that are only involved in infrastructure. There will be a ton of, you know, kind of science and engineering guys There will be the building and construction trades of the AFL-CIO, building and construction, because they build this. The apprentice programs, because we're going to train a gazillion young people who either don't want to go to college or have disappeared and are in the underground economy, but this is going to give them a great, a great job and a great future and a sense of purpose. So the point, there will be no political intervention. I'm knowing Congress, they'll figure out how they can somehow or other still stick their fingers in. I mean, it's Congress. But this is going to be a pretty rough and tumble group of people, and they're going to have a mandate. And these are people who really are not in the political arena in the normal sense. So we've already thought about that. This will not be subject to the appropriations process at all. On state banks, look, a lot of people who are proposing these state banks are really well-intended. We actually met with the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank executive director, who's a really good guy. He's a former Wall Street banker, interestingly, and a professional engineer, and he quit Wall Street to build infrastructure. He loves our bank. He said the problem with what they've got is it's too small. They can't build all the projects they want. The bigger problem that they have, and this is the key to the bank, is that it can deal with interstate processes. We're going to build, let's say we build this has been on the drawing boards, high-speed rail, Chicago to Detroit to Toledo to Cleveland to Pittsburgh, Cleveland to Akron to Columbus, et cetera. Well, a lot of these projects are going to cross state lines. State banks don't cross state lines, even if they had the capital resources necessary, and there is no state bank that does. They're too darn small. But what the state bank guy in New Jersey said to us, which was great, is he said, I love your bank. You can cross state lines. He said they have a gigantic problem if you've ever driven to up I-95, if you ever get the chance. There's something called the Delaware Memorial Bridge, which is a big old bridge. It's really nice. It's old, but it is handled by Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, and nobody knows who has jurisdiction, and nobody knows whose rules apply, and nobody knows how to, make applications for projects, and people don't like going to the meetings. And he said, your bank could have jurisdiction over the whole thing. All our guys want to know, and women, this is big, want to know is, what are the rules? How do we get this project done? And so state banks don't do that. This kind of bank is really going to do that in a very big way and won't have to worry about, crossing state lines. It will just do that in coordination with, authorities, multiplicity of states, et cetera, et cetera. On the bonding, look, it's going to be a kind of similar process. The only difference is that we're going to have a lot of resources, and we're going to work with, not me, but the bank, but we'll work with cities and states in the long term, because ironically, we're not in it to, quote, make a profit, even though it will make a profit. So the bank can step in and build, or help build all those kinds of projects, like, going into all the cities where we know the water systems are in bad shape, and let's fix them all. And so we're going to have $4 trillion, and we'll be able to have, I'll give you one last example and then I'll shut up. There's this immense flooding going on in the Midwest. It's multi-state, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, Arkansas. You got the whole river system that flows into the Mississippi. Well, we should have built a TVA in that area decades ago. We have to build it. And that is going to be an immense cross-state project, but it's going to increase the productivity. And there's no flooding in the Tennessee Valley Authority states. There's 7 states. They ended the flooding. They produced power, TVA, blah, blah, blah. We should have done that. Nobody has the money or the resources to build that kind of middle American water project, which is desperately needed. I mean, these states are underwater. Farmers can't plant. It affects all of us. Nobody's got the capability to do it except this kind of institution.
But also, people shouldn't be shocked if there's pushback on this. It's why we're in this crisis, because all the money is going into individual wealth and not into the wealth of the country. And in fact, if you look at how other countries are prospering and investing in infrastructure, whether it's China, Japan, and other countries, they're using the model of the Alexander Hamilton National Infrastructure Bank that the United States should be using now. So, I mean, it really is unbelievable that we're in the condition that we're in, and other countries are prospering by using the model of the American system.
Does that help a little bit? I mean, okay. It's a start anyhow.
It's a big grasp. Is there any other committee members that has a question? Okay, seeing none, I will move to the members of council that are in the chambers. Is there any member of council that has a question? Councilwoman Sims.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess it's very interesting. Had lots of questions. Now I'm left with a lot more questions. The one question was, how do we make provisions for equity? And you talk about places like Detroit, who probably don't have enough money to borrow much of anything. Oh, and the other thing, I just hated the term that you use, renegade, for LeBron James, for all of our community. I just want to put that out there so that you know. Probably you almost lost me over there, but I think that it seems like a very interesting concept, but it seems like it opened up a lot more questions for me than it did give me answers. I think part of that is because, like you said before, there's really nothing happening in Congress around it necessarily, so there's really no conversation. And so advancing it at this moment seems very premature because there are so many questions. But I am interested in the equity part of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you want to address the equity at all? I think you did, but...
Yeah, let me, look, let me direct you to, and first of all, the language in the bill, we actually, the bill itself is pretty dynamic, even though the concept is identical to what was previously done.
It's Part B.
But if you look in Section 2, Purpose and Authorization, Part B, Part C, and you will see that if you go, it's Section 2 purposes, and then you go down to B, and it's got all of the labor protections, which interestingly enough, even though we had it originally, we had very good meetings with the building trades in Ohio and their attorneys, and we adopted language that they suggested from Ohio building trades officials. Then the last two sentences of Part B come directly from Congressman Clyburn, who we had an excellent meeting with, who's completely intrigued by this and has what he calls a 10-20-30 formula to direct money into impoverished communities. They have a census study of all the most impoverished communities that have had, 30% or more unemployment for 20 years. And, or no.
20% of the population that has had poverty over 30 years.
Over 30 years, and then 10% of all appropriations must go into those communities, which is a really good formula. We'd like to make it even better. And, but never, and Bernie Sanders was asked the same question in one of the town halls a couple days ago, and he's directed them to the Clyburn formula, which we like. And so the point is, and we did have a meeting, just so you know, with the, off the record, with the African American Chamber of Commerce in New Jersey. And Part C, we quote Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. We wrote that in at their suggestion, because we're going to really go into, you know, all the poor communities, even if it means that they're going to, look, once the bank starts to really get rolling, we're going to give grants, not just loans. I mean, it's going to be whatever it takes to once and for all end the poverty, whether it's Portsmouth, Ohio with the highest opioid use, or Chillicothe, or, you know, the rural areas, because we've actually been discussing that with the building trades. We addressed the building trades at their national conference on this, or every urban area. And we're going to clean this thing up once and for all. And in the process, people are going to be proud, they're going to have great jobs, and we're going to, does that help a little bit, or?
It does. It gives me, I think adding Clyburn's formula gives a little more crystalness to when you, because you're talking about investing in disadvantaged communities, and we hear that all the time,
right.
But we don't necessarily invest in an equitable one. So we throw a little few dollars here.
Right, and it's
always, now
I know,
what's,
it is.
you know, so the assurance that we're doing that on the front end was my biggest
The
concern.
sentence that says it will target high-poverty communities, including census tracts with high poverty rates.
They all do.
That's Clyburn's language.
Yeah, I was going to say, they all say that.
Yeah.
But I think adding the formula made
Oh,
it
yeah,
a
the
little
10,
clearer.
20, 30, we can even
Yeah.
put that in if you want. We'll add a sentence, I don't care.
Thank you.
I mean,
But
this
all-
is very dynamic. We are not fixed on every word of the language.
Is there any other member of council that has a question? I see Councilwoman Amobian, and then Councilman Neal with your hand up. Okay, I'll let Councilwoman Amobian. Rich, I apologize.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I serve on the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee of NLC. Could you tell me if you've addressed this with that
Oh, that's
committee? Or if
interesting.
they are
Yeah.
supportive
Oh,
of this?
that's great. Look, all right, two things on that. Number one, in your packet, the packet that's got the Trenton City Council resolution, you'll see I think it's Trenton, and then it's the article that was in, why don't we pass around the magazine? All right. We'll pass the latest issue of the New Jersey Municipalities State Magazine. We met with the state president. They asked for an article on this, and we have the hard copy, which I'll get and we'll circulate around. Everybody can see it. We reprinted it. Then there's an article from the Democratic municipal officials, and you'll see the resolution. All right, it is. Okay, right after the New Jersey municipalities, it says the following resolution is submitted for consideration. It's like page 3 at the top, submitted by Scott Benson, Detroit City Council, Susie Nakazian. Do you see that? The following resolution is submitted. Okay, that passed the Democratic municipal officials. So even though everybody here is a Democratic municipal official, you probably don't know that it passed, which is not a big deal. I was just on a conference call with them a couple of days ago, and they're going to try to put this in their packet that goes out nationally for their August lobbying. Susie, who's the instigator of this business, if you think I'm pushy, she's much pushier than I am. And she's on the NLC Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and she did take it to them, and it was raised at their meeting last year, so it's in discussion. And we have gotten it to a lot of NLC members, bipartisan. Now, the other thing which is pretty funny is that the DMO then took the resolution, which passed the Democratic municipal officials, the executive board, and whatever else the ruling body is. They then took it to the DNC, and in typical DNC fashion, and I was there in Chicago, the DNC passed it. So this has kind of got serious legs to it. But on the League of Cities, the most fascinating thing is I was at their national convention legislative conference in D.C. a couple of weeks ago, and the lead panel was on infrastructure. And the lead speaker was Congressman Carbajal from California, and on his speech, he called twice for a national infrastructure bank. And the Democratic municipal officials are convinced that's because of everything they've been doing. We then met with Carbajal, a bunch of people who have endorsed this, and he was all ears. He wants to put a bill in for a national infrastructure bank. He doesn't know what should be in it yet. And when Angela told him that this had been done 4 times and by Franklin Roosevelt, he was in shock. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say also, it wasn't just, Congressman Carbajal, or just to address what this woman had brought up about Congress really not having an appetite for this, is that the day that the Democratic caucus met with Donald Trump to discuss infrastructure, and they came up with a $2 trillion proposal, and that, nobody really had a way to fund it. But coincidentally, we happened to be on Capitol Hill that day. We had set up in advance 23 meetings over 2 days. A third of them were with members of Congress. And the discussion that what we had was the proposal of how to fund an infrastructure bank. We had everybody's ear on Capitol Hill. Even members of Congress that we hadn't even set up a meeting with, and we mentioned to them that that's what we were there to discuss, they said, okay, I can't discuss this, but give me the minute version. So there is an appetite. See, everybody as you know, the most difficult thing is change. That people want to do what they did before, even though it didn't work, they're familiar with it, and somehow this time it's going to work. Well, it's not going to work, because if you go back in history, other plans never worked before. They're not going to work again, because this is the model of the United States and how it was built. We have a track record. So the point of this is that the appetite is there. We're in the middle of this. It really is just going to take people with guts to get it done. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to do it. But now, I'm telling you, is that in the last 2 to 3 weeks, the discussion is changing, because it's going from, hundreds of billions now into the trillions is what we need. People that have talked, even like Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, who had a proposal for a national infrastructure bank. It was built on PPPs. Public-private partnerships don't work. We can do it with a national bank.
I would also just add that the really good thing is that members of Congress respond to local and state officials that they know, that they trust. When they admit that they've never heard of the way the country was actually built, and then people like yourselves, do resolutions, make calls, meet with them, whatever people do, it has an impact on Congress much bigger than you could imagine, because ironically, power now resides in bodies like this. They are looking to the states and the cities for ideas and for leadership. And that's kind of where we're at, and that's good. And we're convinced, we can get a couple of members to put a bill in and get the discussion started. That's really what we want. Get the discussion started at the level that we want it at. And the irony is that the ball is in your court. People like yourselves are really taking the point in this.
Okay, I still have Councilman Neal here and Councilman Swirsky, and then that's all the questions I'm going to take, and I'm going to tell you why. I wasn't aware that we would be able to have a presentation today, so I don't want to put these other committees behind, but I've been told that you're more than happy to answer any questions after this when people are on the floor, but if you want to share the answers with us, that'd be terrific, but respectful of everyone's time, and that I would just let Councilman Neal know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a lot of different layers before it gets to us, but I'd like to know if there's some semblance of what can be used on the local level, in the sense that, everyone's scurrying to get in position for opportunity zones, which they have to have their plans in before the end of this year. Looking at this, has any of your team done anything on a local level with local communities with social impact bonds or pay for performance bonds, which, reward the capitalist side that invest and then lowers the risk for local communities. Because I like this, but just knowing how it takes to pass legislation through, I don't know how long it's going to take before it gets to us. Some of the things that you mentioned, we would need help putting in place so that if something like this came, we have local projects. We don't have the training facilities to get our workforce in position, and we'd just be repeating the same type of challenges that we have, so.
I mean, I haven't looked at those specifics. They absolutely look like they're merit looking into. I mean, we're going to be loose. I mean, we're not going to do it exactly the way FDR did. And so there's going to be, look, we're proposing, I mean, the bank is going to have state and local officials on the board, specifically so that money can get to where it's got to go and cut out. We're going to cut out as much stupid red tape and, godforsaken baloney, to be clean about it, that is necessary. So I wrote down, what you suggested. I'll take a look. Sounds, really good, and we're just going to have to work on this in a way that what we're concerned about, which was raised by the council women on the side, money's got to get into the poor communities, fix this, restore hope. What went on in Flint, and it's, by the way, Flint is not over. Until that water system is completely changed and replaced, they're messing around. We just testified in the New York City Council on the bank because the immediate crisis there is they've got a tunnel going under the Hudson River that's 108 years old that is collapsing in front of their eyes. Steel rods are going through passenger cars. If those tunnels collapse, that's 20% of the gross domestic product of the country shuts down immediately. 200,000 people go under those tunnels every day. 450 rail trains go through those tunnels. We're there testifying. People know it's got to get fixed. You know what the issue was? The water system in the city of Newark is putting lead into, little kids, and it's got to get fixed. So, and we testified in the state legislature in Trenton. We thought it was going to be on rail. It ended up being on opioids and lead, because this is everywhere. And so, Congress is saying they've got 20 years to fix the water problem. That is a load of garbage. They have yesterday. And because kids are getting sick, they get permanent damage to their bodies when they drink water with lead. This is not like a game where you can somehow or another, at least now, reverse that. So you don't fix it now, you're killing people. So we got to go in and we got to fix it, and we'll take Councilman Neal's suggestion. Sounds good. We got to do whatever it does to expedite getting the money into the places to fix the problem and getting people what they actually need.
But during Infrastructure Week in the Congress, there was a panel of people from the National League of Cities, mayors, and they were expressing the same urgency and hysteria that you're talking about, and they're saying, we don't have time to wait, just give us the money, we'll do it ourselves. But the problem is, yes, it is urgent. This is life and death, as you know. People are already dying out of despair. But the thing is that because we're in such a deep hole, that you have to have a national project so that you can change the dynamic of the entire country. Because we're on the Titanic, right? The whole thing is sinking. You can plug the holes, but another, leak is going to spring. So you have to, it's like what Tim Ryan brought up at the town meeting last week. He said that we've had an economy that is coastal, focused on California and New York. What about the Midwest? Well, this is really to deal with the whole country. You can't get away with it. And what, Stu referenced, whenever we went to these city council meetings, it was always Band-Aid solutions, whether you're talking about the schools, bringing in more Narcan, bringing in filters for the water. Once they got the idea that you could have an FDR big program that would define the entire future, all those small ideas sort of went out the window and said, yes, this is what we need. So everybody's waiting on the federal government to say, yeah, let's just do what's required. Let's not kick the can down the road again. We've done it for 50 years. We can't do it anymore.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Councilman Spilsky now.
First of all,
Sorry.
we have a lot of people from Akron who've made it to the Nationals.
Rich, turn your mic on, thanks.
Well, that was red. I wasn't speaking into it. We have a lot of people from Akron who've made it into the national scene besides LeBron James. The Black Keys, Chrissy Hine, Joseph Arthur, number of other people. So I hope when you leave here, you become a little more aware of that. I can't help it. Let that go. Yeah, that's his fault. Okay. We also are at a stage of fixing our infrastructure. If you drove through, you see all these roads being repaired, all this new construction. Some of it's us locally, some of it is from the state. We're in a very transition period in terms of our roads. We also have had to deal with a problem that stayed around for the last 20 years, which was how to fund the transformation of our sewer system. And our residents are paying some pretty high bills to cover that. And we, as local officials, are very sensitive to that, and also sensitive to the proposition that at some point, we would not like to ever see another increase in that area. So the bank would fund new infrastructure, if there's a project already in process, like our sewer system, would money go for that to help prevent more burden on our taxpayers?
But we should do both. But we're going to have $4 trillion to kick around. I mean, the idea.
So it won't be just for starting new projects?
No, we're going to fix all the bad stuff. And I mean, we don't want to increase the burden on local citizens. I mean, it's completely crazy. Look, gas taxes are being raised everywhere. I mean, they just raised it in Ohio. They want to raise it by 45 cents a gallon in Michigan. They just raised it in Illinois. Our view is, we're not even big fans of raising gas tax because it is regressive. But if you're going to do it, and I'm not ecstatic about it, the only way that makes sense is just pay the interest on $4 trillion rather than using the gas tax for, road repairs and this and that, because you're just adding to people's tax burden unnecessarily, whereas a bank could come in with, either really low loans or grants and address
So there would be additional help if you're in the middle of a project.
Yeah.
One quick comment, just.
I'm going to allow you to do it because you were the last one I called on.
I really think at the federal level, often, even if there's people on boards from local governments, the decision-making is poor. And I think Congress often hasn't a clue about the real needs of the local situations. That's why I had to remind you of the Black Keys and Joseph Arthur, Chrissy. And in fact, the Congress really, to me, is just completely out of touch with what is needed locally. I would think that I would be hesitant to feel like something good would come out if there was only a token representation of local officials or the local viewpoint. And I would hope that you would strengthen that, 100%, and change that dynamic so that it's seen as money that goes to local officials and that there be a process, a governing body that knows how to deal with that. I mean, if you walk down the street with a mayor of most cities, they could tell you where the screws are in the sewers. They could tell you nuts and bolts things that
So to speak.
I think the Congress people are not really in touch with, and especially some of the ideological people in Congress, from both left and right, in my opinion. But that there are people who are very experienced in managing resources at the local level, and I would just hope that they would be empowered by this process. So it's not just the money, it's not just raise the money and get into a bank, but it's also how do we change that dynamic where the local officials are really driving it because they are the ones with the experience at managing these kind of projects in a way that's most effective.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the point, and that's why we say that the, if you look at, you know, if you don't have to study this flow chart, but the vast majority of the lending is going to go directly to state and local government and state and local officials because they own the infrastructure. Then there will be people on the board who are not functionaries, but are the kind of people that you point to that are expert, hands-on, build this stuff, know how to do it, state and local officials, so the money can get to the right places in time, not that with no political strings attached. We're going to take politics out of the bank. Probably not, but we're going to take 90% out.
I think
And the other
that's-
10%,
I think that's a great intention, and that's what I try to base things on.
Yeah.
Intentions. This was healthy. I apologize that I wasn't as aware as I should have been. We would have given you more time. But I want to thank my colleagues, and I want you to know that they are very open for our questions and for our concerns so that what is eventually presented is the best we could do at this time, the very best. And it sounds like I can't thank you enough for being willing to listen to all of our concerns. And I want to apologize to the other committees that have to meet now. They were in just for this short time, so it was the right thing to do, is to give them the time. And I thank you very much for your vision and for your passion.
I just wanted to thank everybody, thank Ms. Samples for going way out on a limb like a normal council person does, and initiating this wild process, and for Ms. Keith to just interrupt your normal schedule, and thank everybody. I am available by phone, email, and text. I have cards. I'll get anybody who wants them. Hey, call me. I was interrupted numbers of times during this meeting, by calls. That's their problem. Call me or text or email, and we'll get to you. This is real. And thank you again for your time, and thanks for taking the point.
I would make a motion for time on this particular one. I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, we have placed this on time. Is there anything else to come before the Public Service Committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Okay, next